One of the most iconic anime ever created is Akira. Everything starts with a mysterious explosion in Tokyo, and it leads to this era of aggressive rebuilding and the birth of an artificial megacity in the middle of Tokyo Bay, Neo-Tokyo, which would be right about there. It's a story about a lost generation and about human experimentation and civic chaos, and it's about the struggle for identity in a technologically and politically turbulent society. But it's not just the story, but this fantastical cityscape that's both synthetic and organic, both grand yet intimate, sinister yet nostalgic, that has etched Akira into our collective memory. I want to talk about the origin of Neo-Tokyo and the story of three different people separated by time and space, whose visions somehow led to the creation of this incredible world. A portion of this video is sponsored by LG. The creator of Akira, Katsuhiro Otomo, was born in Tohoku, which is a remote, scenic region in the northeast of Japan. But in the 70s, after high school, he moved to Tokyo. He said it was like being in a different era. For the first time, he saw things like student demonstrations and gangs and homelessness. And he was particularly fascinated by one subculture, the Bōsōzoku, youth biker gangs known for being loud and wild and driving recklessly on their custom bikes, which is kind of surprising coming from one of the politest cultures in the world. But it's actually a symptom of a society that evolved too fast.
It goes like this.
After World War II, Japan experienced industrialization and urbanization at an insane speed, especially in places like Tokyo and Osaka.
This led to what's known as the Japanese economic miracle, and it made Japan one of the fastest growing economies in the world at the time. There was a growing middle class, but there was also lots of people who felt left behind. And Bōsōzoku gave these people, especially the youth, a sense of identity and community, with their own rituals and rules, and even uniforms.
The streetscape transformed as well.
Commercial clusters called yokocho started to pop up around train stations, where you can find the tiniest micro bars and restaurants.
Or the vertical versions of these, called the zakyo, with signage all over the facade to try to lure you from the street.
As more of these fill the city, it also placed Tokyo in the collective imagination.
And all of this is what Otomo tried to capture in Akira. This is where Neo-Tokyo would have been. Of course, it doesn't exist in real life, but they did come pretty close to building something very similar.
There were two main industrial zones that were instrumental to this post-war economic boom, and people flocked to these areas from all over Japan. But the population growth wasn't really properly planned or controlled, so it was seriously overcrowded, and there was a serious lack of infrastructure or essential services. Several proposals tried to tackle this problem, including plans for filling up almost 70% of Tokyo Bay with land. But this proposal got the most attention. It was a concept for a floating island with these mega spines that spanned across Tokyo Bay, with adaptable residential modules that could be added or sunk. And it followed the principles of a new architectural movement called Metabolism.
This is the very first and one of the very few built examples of the Metabolism movement, a movement that believed that buildings and cities are like living organisms, and it should adapt and grow based on the needs of the population.
But the movement never really took off, at the building scale or at the city scale. And they never ended up adopting any of these proposals. Instead, they opted to intensify land use within existing urban areas. They developed new satellite cities and towns, and they expanded into Tokyo Bay. And they also improved transportation to better connect these areas, eventually turning it into one of the most efficient and beautiful transportation networks in the world. But Otomo decided to adopt this idea of this artificial island for Neo-Tokyo. And in Akira, it creates this physical and symbolic division between the old and the new. And this radical concept was by an architect called Kenzo Tange. Kenzo Tange is arguably one of the most influential Japanese architects. He received the Pritzker Prize in 1987, which is like the equivalent of a Nobel Prize in architecture. Tange was born in Osaka in 1913. Then he moved to Hiroshima in high school in 1930, where he came across this drawing. A drawing by the Swiss architect Le Corbusier, who is considered to be the father of modernism. Modernism was a rejection of the past and all of these historical styles that came before it that they considered to be stuffy and inauthentic. It was this vision for a new democratic architecture that reflected the spirit of the industrial age by removing ornamentation and focusing on the function over form. Although this is how most architecture trained now, back then, this was pretty radical, especially in Japan, that pretty much had an unbroken tradition of architecture, which developed isolated from the Western world over thousands of years. Anyways, it was this that made Kenzo Tange want to become an architect. Later in his life, Tange would work at the office of Maekawa, who actually worked for Corbusier, and designed buildings that almost remind me of this perfect mid-journey blend of modernism and traditional Japanese architecture. So Tange learned from him, but he was even more radical, since he was propelled by this post-war energy of needing to build quickly and efficiently, while also having this desire to start fresh.
He shocked everyone by designing buildings like this.
And this. And this.
During a time when buildings looked like this.
For his Tokyo Metropolitan Government Building, which is one of the major landmarks of Tokyo.
Apparently he took inspiration from Gothic cathedrals, but also from computer chips. And for the unfinished Olympic Stadium in Akira, that's where everything ends, the Yoyogi National Gymnasium served as the inspiration. In this case, not so much for the design, but for the symbolism. The Yoyogi Gymnasium was built in 1964 for the Tokyo Olympics, which was a huge deal at the time. It was the very first Asian country to host the Olympics, and it was just 19 years after the war. And so the Olympics really helped propel Japan into this period of high growth.
In Akira, the bomb hits Tokyo in 1988, and roughly 31 years later, in 2019, they're selected to host the Olympics. But it actually happened in real life, remember? Before COVID, Tokyo was supposed to host the 2020 Olympics. Anyways, in both the real building and the manga, the stadium symbolizes Japan's revival and entry onto the world stage.
The stadium was also first of its kind. Because Tange didn't want any columns between the athletes and the spectators, he created a suspended roof. And suspending a roof over such a large distance, although it had been done for bridges before, it had never been done for buildings. It was inspired by the Phillips Pavilion by Le Corbusier, except it was about 10 times in size. And it evokes certain traditional Japanese qualities. And it kind of reminds you of a Japanese pagoda. And standing here, this thing is impressive with these sweeping curves. And I can imagine how it could have inspired Otomo, especially for that time.
The difference is that in Neo-Tokyo, it was full of colors. Colors that were incredibly vibrant, especially when you view it on my LG MyView monitor, who's also the sponsor of today's video. I was looking for a monitor that's big enough for when I'm doing research, and also something we can use to review videos as a team. This 31.5-inch panel means I can have a double, or triple, or even quadruple views on it, and the 4K IPS display is super crisp with a wide color gamut, so it's become really useful for when we're editing assets that require color accuracy. It has lots of different options for connection, including a 90-watt USB-C port that can charge your laptop. It even comes with a full HD detachable webcam with a microphone and a privacy shutter. But this is not only a TV-sized monitor, it's also a full-feature smart TV. You can use LG WebOS to run apps or cast content from any of your devices, and even watch Netflix without the need to connect to a computer. It's got its own speakers, and honestly, it's a great option if you live in a small apartment and you need a standalone device that can function as a second screen and a smart TV. If you want to learn more about LG MyView, check out the link in the description. The production of Akira used 327 distinct colors, which is far more than the typical 100 to 150 used for that time. And 50 of these colors were created specifically for the film. Since everything was hand-drawn back then, the decision to use such a wide palette of colors was a huge investment in time and resources. And in Akira, these colors are used strategically to symbolize different themes and emotions. For example, red is used to create a heightened sense of urgency and intensity, and also danger and violence. Green seems to represent elements or scenes that are unnatural or artificial, or the kind of scenes with mysterious elements of technology or supernatural powers. In this case, it's combined with a bold red, and it feels somehow sinister. One of the critiques of modernism is that it feels sterile and lifeless, but here, the city feels alive and dynamic, especially with elements like this, with this maze of cables and wires that mimic blood vessels and nerves. It almost blurs this line between organic and mechanical. And the city reminds you of a kind of organism that has a life of its own. Kenzo Tange's work might have influenced the architecture of Neo-Tokyo, but the massive scale of the city was inspired by Metropolis, which is one of the most iconic films from the 1920s by the Austrian filmmaker Fritz Lang. Lang was born in 1890 in Vienna, and he was initially interested in studying architecture, but when he moved to Berlin after World War I, which was a hotspot for artistic experimentation, he fell in love with film. Then in 1924, Fritz Lang visited New York City. New York exploded in the 1920s thanks to innovations in steel and reinforced concrete, which allowed them to build much taller. This led to a population boom, and because Manhattan is an island, it grew even taller. He saw the skyscrapers and the factories and the energy. And he tried to capture all of this, but at a mega scale. Using set design and special effects that were insane for that time, he created the image of a megacity, which actually inspired movies like Blade Runner and Star Wars. And of course, Akira and Neo-Tokyo, with massive towers and sky bridges connecting different towers, and this constant backdrop of searchlights, which symbolize surveillance and control. But when you look at this detail right here, it actually tells the story of two very different cities. So Metropolis is a megacity with a very clear vertical separation, with the upper class at the top and the working class at the bottom operating this machine that keeps everyone afloat. So even though it's very tall, it's not really a multi-layered city. In Neo-Tokyo, the skyways and rooftops are public spaces, meaning there's some sort of public path that bring people to the top.
But in reality, this is not that common. Because skyways and buildings leading to the rooftops are privately owned, sometimes the access can be restricted to certain groups of people, especially the people like the Bōsōzoku.
We actually spent a month in Tokyo while making this video, so I did get to see a lot of different rooftop parks. This one was my favorite, Miyashita Park. It sits on top of a shopping mall, and it's very porous. And by that, I mean, there's lots of different access points from the street, there's outdoor and indoor components, and the main public stairwell, it actually slices through the mall, and it stays open even after the mall's closed. And I've never seen anything like this here in Vancouver, so I thought this was a really successful example. But apparently, it's pretty controversial with the locals, because this plot of land used to be a real public park before they built this shopping mall. But for me, this complex layering and this push and pull of different entities, all within this intense density, and somehow everything works. You can kind of get lost and you can get pulled into a million different directions, and there's layers to the city that you will never fully understand. And for me, this is what makes a city so interesting. A city is a thing that you cannot confine, an object that extends its shadow beyond its limits. Each one of these people we talked about today were transformed by cities. Cities shocked them and inspired them and fueled their imaginations, and they ended up creating their own twisted and fantastical versions of these cities. And I think it's because some cities have a soul, formed by this serendipitous mix of millions of people who bring their own dreams and ambitions and fears. And when they collide, some way, somehow, it can create something extraordinary. There's a lot of research that we did that didn't make it into this video, so if you guys are interested, as always, we'll have that in our research booklet. We also consulted these books, which are both really great. We also generated tons of custom graphics for this video, and we decided to put them into t-shirts. If you guys are interested, everything is in the description. So what do you guys think? Have you ever felt like a city had a soul? Let me know in the comments.
Get in, get out, don't go, please stay.
Akira. Okay, you got it?